Thank the Minister. The question is that the amendment be agreed to. I give the call to the member for Chifley.
Thanks, Acting Deputy Speaker. Minister Turnbull, I think, through the chair, I think there are a number of things that are important. Firstly is if we are to ensure that the sector, and in terms of the value of innovation to the Australian economy, is to be fully realised, certainly we need to address the concern that exists among smaller companies, among start-ups, that they believe that larger, more established elements or sections of our economy have had the ear of government, regardless of politics, for way too long. In their view, they believe that it's easy for miners and farmers to get into a minister's office than some of these firms. And I think we need to be able to actively dispel that notion by demonstrating support through this parliament to change that perception through deed, not just word. At the outset, I think it's important to recognise that, while it's easy for the minister and others to be able to get up and say, for instance, that and talk about the negatives of this bill, which are the previous bill, the changes that we made when we were in government, that we have acknowledged have caused the unintended consequence and impact on start-ups in making their life more difficult. We have acknowledged that. And in fact, we didn't acknowledge it just in word, we actually did it in deed. And in 2013, we were the ones who kicked off the process of getting Treasury to then look at how do we change the law to ensure that the impact on this sector and impact on start-ups would not continue and would not act as a drag on innovation in this country. We started that process. It was obviously something that a lot of us would have preferred, based on our dealings with the sector, to have been happening way earlier. Absolutely. But I might point out too that as much as the coalition were very keen to see change happen, it's nearly 2 years since they started talking about this when they were in opposition and when they got into government. I note that the minister, when an opposition spokesperson or opposition minister for communications was talking about this issue when in opposition. I note that there are a number of backbenchers when the coalition was elected to government, said they wanted to deal with this, and it took them a considerable period of time because it didn't happen in the last budget, and in fact it was continually promised that action would be done and enacted in a speedy way. It took a long time to happen. Why? Because, as people know, this is not an easy area to deal with. This did take a lot of work to determine how much money would be set aside by government to deal with this, and the answers were not present quickly, despite the fact, despite the suggestion, despite the eagerness that was displayed by a number of people, including the minister, to deal with it quickly. They didn't. They couldn't. And so if we want to play the cheap political games, we can certainly do it, but I don't think that's of any value to this sector. What is important is seeing action. It's why Labor, why the opposition is keen to work with the government in supporting this bill and making sure that it goes through, and to ensure that we can move quickly to a situation where start-ups are able to offer these as part of the remuneration package that they extend to people that they want to bring on board to help them bring their ideas to life and transform the economy. And there is a lot at stake. And I'm reminded of a quote that says, "The fact a 20-year-old can start a company worth $20 billion is mind-blowing." That's where we're at. That quote coming from Matt Barry, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Freelancer, which has done remarkable things. And he's absolutely right. That quote in itself indicates what a remarkable time it is for young Australians in this country who are on the threshold of potentially fundamental shifts within our broader economy, and it's younger Australians that can drive it, not just established companies, not just people who've got long in the tooth and built up a long list of experiences. These are young people with guts, with determination and capability that has been unleashed through the internet and through innovation that has sprung from it to be able to change the way the economy works. And the imperative is there. I mean, this is the reason why I'm so enthused about this sector, is because of the fact that they can fundamentally change and re-gear our economy at a time when we need it most, when we're seeing the type of sources of income and economic wealth change, and we have the pressure on us to grow other sections outside in the non-mining sector of the economy. We need to see that change occur. We also need to get ready as technology slices into all those jobs that used to exist, changes the way that companies work, puts greater demands on the individual skills of employees, of Australians, that will not be able to get the same manual and entry-level jobs that once existed. It really will fundamentally alter the way that they live in the world of work. And so we need to be able to look at this sector, and we need to be able to work out how we can encourage its greater growth here. And why the fuss? Well, it may seem that startups themselves, when particularly on the floor of the House of Representatives, they've been mentioned so much in the last couple of weeks, it may seem that they're the sort of fad du jour. But quite simply put, there is no such thing as overnight success, or as Seth Gooden, the marketing writer, said, it takes 6 years to become an overnight success in this sector. And he's quite right, because a lot of these people, when you look at the stories like Jodie Fox and Shoes of Prey, you look at Lenny Mayo and the others at 99 Designs, I think of Scott Farquhar, and I also think of Mark Cannon-Brooks at Atlassian. I also think of people like Rebecca Campbell at Posse.com. And I recall all the stories she's told of the pitches she's had to make to try and get funds, to try and get support to build and to bring her vision to life. A lot of them will tell you there is no such thing as overnight success. They've had to work at it for quite some time. And for them, they have been on a long pathway to this point. But in terms of startups themselves, they are also not just an overnight success, they're actually a reflection on the evolution of innovation, where innovation was primarily once driven by government and R&D. It then went into big business, and then big business outsourced it to smaller research capabilities and smaller research firms, and it's now startups that are leading in research and development. And they can only do it fundamentally through a number of key ingredients. Naturally, faith and ability, and faith in their own ability to be able to bring their ideas to life is one thing, but they need two things on top of that. They need talent, skills, people that have got the know-how to help bring those ideas to life, and capital. And the reason this bill is so important is because it helps deal with the issue of capital. It helps deal with the issue of being able to defer in some way the pressures that might exist on a startup in being able to stump up money quickly to be able to funnel it through remuneration. Those startups that want to be able to see, for instance, that if they don't have the money there to pay people for the talent and the skills that they bring to that startup, that they can defer that wealth creation by providing options or shares, providing some sort of equity in the startup itself. And that's how these share schemes, how these options have arisen. Now, in 2009, there was an intention to deal with the attempt by bigger businesses to change the way they remunerated their executives by basically paying them up through options and share schemes and not having the salary packages structured in the way that they were. That was the intent. The unintended consequence was it affected startups who wanted to be able to issue these options. It was something that had a terrible impact on startups, and certainly a number of us have acknowledged the impact that has existed for these startups, and this is part of the reason, or the big reason why, we have been keen to support a change. As I said earlier, we started that process when we were in government. It is now being picked up by this government, and we support the move. We certainly, in terms of this bill, recognise the range of things that are sought to be achieved. For example, deferring the requirement to, for instance, have taxation paid until the actual options are exercised, and also providing an additional concession to start-up companies that will target young enterprises to reactivate and energise, as the Minister for Small Business indicated in his second reading speech, employee share scheme arrangements for start-ups. And it will also, through the type of initiatives that have been announced by the government, see the Australian Taxation Office work with industry to develop safe harbour valuation methods and standard documents that will be useful for the sector, and in particular targeting those start-ups with revenue under $50 million, and, as I indicated before, a requirement for taxation only when the value is realised. These are important steps. I might add that I have detected, from the consultations I've had with the start-up sector, a degree of interest in the number of listed companies who've sought to exercise a degree of pressure on the government, which I see it resisted, and I think is important that it was resisted, to put in place some arrangements that would have benefited listed companies to a far greater extent than was proportionate or proper, and that it would have made sure that a lot of this benefit is targeted to start-ups themselves. And that has been very important, and it is something we should keep a watching brief on. In making these changes, if there is a temptation for one moment to think that this mechanism alone will support start-ups, this is misplaced, because it's quite clear that there is still a very big reform agenda that is required to ensure that start-ups will continue. As I said before, they're at the front. They are at the front of innovation. They are now picking up the lion's share of R&D in this country by way of what they are doing, breaking down existing business models and changing the way. In a services economy like ours, 70% of our economy based on services and very vulnerable to disruption, they are doing the big lot of work. But there is still a lot to do. The start-up community certainly welcomes, and I've detected it in my consultations with the community. I'm sure that the Minister for Communications has detected that, as I know he talks quite a lot with representatives of the start-up community. They certainly welcome the extra attention. But my biggest fear is that this will become a fad, and we can't afford it to be a trend and a passing phase. Start-ups themselves are adding enormous economic value to the nation. They cannot be seen as an afterthought or a passing thought, as the Shadow Treasurer said in his press club speech last week. They have to remain constantly in our thoughts, because they will generate the jobs of the future. They are the ones that, for every single job in the tech sector, has a potential to generate 5 others. And in the US, the tech sector, as I've indicated previously to the House, experiencing job growth at the rate of 25 times the rate compared to other sectors. We cannot afford us to think or believe that start-ups are simply the creators of a neat or nifty app that might have some sort of limited productivity benefit. This is the wrong way and undersells the value of the work of start-ups in our broader economy and in our community. They generate real economic value, and we cannot afford to see them just ignored when the fad passes. This is why Shadow Treasurer Bowen, the member for McMahon, indicated that we will set up a Treasurer's Entrepreneurial Council that will ensure that the Treasurer, one of the key drivers of the development and implementation of economic policy in this country, has input at the time that is critical in the terms of the development of policy, and has said, as I understand this, the Shadow Assistant Treasurer said today, that this whole area of whether or not the benefits are being delivered from the bill that's being debated now will continue. And it is important that and I certainly welcome that initiative. We also need to make sure that we continually address those 2 areas that start-ups say need attention: building up talent in this country, being able to ensure that the next generation of people that will go into the sector have the skills and capability to do so. That we can also ensure that talent from other parts of the world come here too. That is an area of reform as well. That we can bring back our own talent that has been developed here in Australia but is sitting in other parts of the world. For instance, when I visited the United States, I was staggered to hear 20,000 Australians working on the West Coast in this sector. We need to bring them back. We need greater support for those ideas through capital. And I certainly think the other reform area that needs to happen is finding a way to build those bridges between one of the largest national savings pools in the world, our superannuation sector, and the VC and angel investor community, to ensure that we have greater support for ideas on the way through. We have a lot to do in this space. This bill is important, certainly recognise that, but it is not the final step It is one step in a continuing journey to ensure that Australia can exercise its full potential, generate jobs for the future and make an impact on the world scale.
I thank the member for Chifley.